Hello, BookTube. Well, as you might remember, I'm in Vermont. Frida and I are vacationing for the long weekend in Vermont. I have to say, I mean, I make a point in my life. I try to make a point in my life of making the contours of my life into something that I enjoy on a day-to-day basis, but getting away is nice. Getting away is very nice. The tempo is completely different, as you can tell. Maybe you can't. There's no noise. There's no traffic. There are no sirens. There are no crazy people on the sidewalk. The only crazy people are my hosts. And we had a big, full day today. Frida was with me the whole time. So in addition to the nice pace and the beautiful weather and the quiet and the friendliness, there was none of that stretched rubber band feeling when I am doing something and she is somewhere else without me. She was with me the whole time. And we went out and about all over, and that of course involved books. It involved a bunch of other stuff. I should, in my own defense, say it involved a bunch of other stuff too. I came up here with a master list of stuff that I wanted to get, because I know that we're going to consignment shops and, you know, secondhand shops and all sorts of stuff like that. And there's always a list of miscellaneous stuff that I just am never going to get when I'm wandering around in Boston. But if I have a car and if I'm going from spot to spot, yes, that will work. So I didn't just get books, but this isn't a couch pillow channel. This is a book channel. So I thought I'd show you the books that I got today. It's a stack of books. Once again, my resolution to get fewer of this kind of thing went right out the window. And the first one I want to show you is a perfect example of that, because how many copies in different editions of this book have I bought in used bookstore excursions since I've had this channel? A perfect example. That shouldn't be happening. But this is The Greek Way by Edith Hamilton. We stopped at a library book sale, just an ongoing library book sale, and somebody had dumped a whole shelf of these great old modern libraries. These mass market size hardcovers with the dust jackets, most of them in perfect condition. So I grabbed this. I really like this as a format. I will see if I have already given away the other copies of The Greek Way that I have shown on this channel. If I haven't, if I have, then this will be it. And then I got this. This is The Bostonians by Henry James, with an introductory essay by Irving Howe, who's fantastic. I was mentioning to Mark that what I would really like to find is the big Irving Howe collected nonfiction works. That would be fantastic. And I'm hoping that this was not such a stupid impulse buy, that all I will do when I get back to Hyde Cottage is read the introduction by Irving Howe and then not read the book. I would hope that if I buy this thing, I bought it to reread The Bostonians. I haven't reread The Bostonians in probably 15 years. It's 1885 or 86, something like that. It's in the 1880s that Henry James wrote this, and this was right around the end of what is pretentiously referred to as his middle period, when he was transitioning from the tightly controlled formal novels of his early period to the just monstrous uncontained bloat of his late period. And this is sort of in between there. It doesn't have, if I remember correctly, it doesn't have much in the way of standout characters. But I really like the portrait of Boston in the Gilded Age, and I also like, there's a segment in this that shifts scene completely to Cape Cod, a completely different Cape Cod than exists today. So I'd like to think that I will reread it. That would be great. And then this next one I will not reread right away. I got it mainly because it's in perfect condition. It's an 80-year-old hardcover with a paper dust jacket, and yet it's in the same condition as if you had bought it in a store. I already have a copy of this in this format. And I'm glad to have a second one, especially since it was so cheap. And this is Francis Hackett's biography of Henry VIII, and this is going on 100 years old, and is just a marvel of eloquence. Just a marvel of eloquence. The research on some aspects of Henry VIII, not just his infamous marriages, but also his role in the English Reformation, his wars on the continent. Research has moved on, of course, from this book, but this is still a fantastic biography to read. I have read sections from it on this channel many times, so I won't bother you with that. And then this next one is a trade paperback of a historical novel. I read this when it first came out, back in 1979, and I don't think that I've recently seen a trade paperback of it, so I grabbed it. This is by James Alexander Thom, and this is Long Knife. This is a big fat historical novel about George Rogers Clark, who was an utterly fascinating period in American colonial history, led a war party, led a, a mission that is scarcely even mentioned in textbooks anymore. And he's the closest that he comes to fame now for most people who have a passing familiarity with American history will be his brother. His brother was the Clark of the Lewis and Clark expedition. But he had a fascinating story on his own. And this author is one of those mid-20th century historical novels who are essentially writing history. This guy lived, he was a crackpot, he was a journalist, he was a Marine, and he was a recluse. For a lot of time when he was working on his big, fat historical novels, he was a recluse. So he would get a massive amount of research materials and then just hole up and write his book. And I don't remember if this thing has an afterword or an introduction or anything by him, but he often said in interviews and in the afterwards of other books that he wrote, he often said, this is essentially, what you have just read is essentially a work of history. There's dialogue and there are dramatic descriptions, but there is nothing in this book that did not happen or that could not have happened. I have not moved anyone around. I have not invented dialogue if there's dialogue already in the historical record. When my character is on the New River and encounters a sleet storm on a particular day, you can be absolutely sure that a sleet storm happened in that location on that day. And there are a bunch of other mid-century historical novelists who are a lot the same way. They're very, very similar to that. So that when you get through with this, you have read basically the biography of George Rogers Clark that no one will write in the 20th century. There's probably a bibliography included. He often included bibliographies with his novels. And Clark has had a couple of great books. One of them came out at right about the same time as the Francis Hackett Henry VIII. And that, I wonder if that's mentioned in here. There was one from, okay, yeah, there is a bibliography. Okay. All right, right, okay. Francis Palmer's book was from 1930. It's called Clark of the Ohio. That is an old book. No one will ever reprint it. You'll never see it. But if you do see it in a used bookstore, Clark of the Ohio is quite good to read. And that, I think there are about 15 or 20 books listed in the bibliography, but I guarantee you that this author read much more than that. In his bibliography, he's listing the books that he used, not the books that he consulted. Letters from the period that it'll be a thrill to reread. I haven't reread anything by this author in quite some time, and there were a handful of such historical novelists in the mid-20th century that just took very scrupulous care to make sure that the facts of their book were as right as far as they could be determined. Jean Plady was another one of those. Doesn't get the credit that she deserves. And in her afterwards, in her introductions to her novels, she would specifically tell you, okay, you just read my novel about Thomas More. Here is a brief list and discussion of the deviations that I take from the historical record. But I am very proud of the fact that I have done as much research as a biographer would do. I think that's really neat. And this was another author who was like that. Then this next one is by Paul Eldridge. It may be the find of this trip. Certainly, I wasn't expecting to find it. I didn't know that it existed. I can't imagine that it would be possible for even an assiduous scholar to write a book on this subject. But nevertheless, here it is. This is Wilson Shugart at Harrow. This is a little book, a little history of Lord Byron at Harrow School as a boy. I know there were records, and there were all sorts of people later on when Byron became, world famous. There were people who had been at Harrow, either as a teacher or as students, who would write brief accounts and memoirs. But I still can't imagine you could get a whole book on the subject of Byron at Harrow. And yet, I'm holding it in my hand, a Byron book to go on my Byron shelf that is on a specific subject and that I have not read. That's incredible. It's possible that we will do more book hunting in the course of this visit. I'd like to think we've probably scoured this area of Vermont. We're briefly toying with the idea of going to a big used bookstore that is a bit of a trip away. It's up the state, like an hour and a half one way just to get there. And we were briefly touring with that. But if buying all of these things at cheap venues makes a mockery of my recent decisions, my recent reiterated decisions to control my used book buying, then surely getting in a car and driving for 90 minutes one way just to go to a used bookstore is even worse. So but anyway, I'm not done. There's still more to do here. There's this thing you will see, those of you who are eagle-eyed will see 2 copies of this in this frame. This is Seamus Heaney's translation of Beowulf, which he worked on for a long time, and friends of his, when he was talking about it, said, "You've got to be joking. It's nothing like what you do. Why on earth would you do that?" There were a couple of real-world reasons why Shea Heaney did this, one of which was that he had been approached by Norton with the idea that maybe we would put this in the Norton Anthology of Literature, which means a very nice paycheck on a regular basis to you and your literary heirs. But another thing was that he wanted the challenge of it. Wanted to see if he could make a Beowulf for the ages. And as any of you know who have read the Seamus Heaney Beowulf, he did succeed in doing that. This is an absolutely immortal example of the art of translation. And I love it. I loved it when it first came. I was blown away when it first came out. When it first, I think, when did this is a deckle-edged trade paperback with French flaps. The eagle-eyed among you will spot a second copy of this book in this frame that is a hardcover. But when did this come out? I remember that when it came out, this came out in the year 2000. And I remember when it was one of the very strongest bell notes that I heard during my long tenure out of the book reviewing world that made me want to get back into book reviewing. I read this and it was so brilliant that I wanted to review it. I don't know, in those years where I was out of reviewing, I almost never felt that. I talked about books all the time with my customers and with my friends, but the urge to sit down and review a book, to reach an audience with it, it took something special to do that, and this did that. This had that effect on me, and I love it. I've had many copies over the years, and every time I have a copy and somebody approaches me, either, in person or nowadays through BookTube, and says, I want to read Beowulf, what should I do? I immediately, just like I mentioned yesterday, I immediately grab the copy that I have off my shelf and mail it to them. So I'm pretty sure that this is my only copy of the Shea Heaney Beowulf, so I was happy to find it. I grabbed it right away. And then these last 2 are also finds of the trip. These are treats. They're the old Marvel Comics Essential volumes. You comic book fans will know these. Marvel for a long time. I don't think they do it anymore because they realized that there's money in them thar boomers. They realized that why print a whole run of cheap black and white reprint volumes when you can just reprint things in color for 3 times the money, and the older audience of comic book fans will buy it anyway. But for a long time, Marvel did these essential volumes. They were trade paperbacks. They were relatively cheap. I think they were like, this still has the Borders price tag on it. This was $17, and you get a vast number of issues. And the reason that Marvel kept the pricing down is because they're printed in black and white on pulp style paper. And this is one of the volumes that Mark just came across them in the bookstore that we were in and wanted to know, are these a yes or a no? And I grabbed them. I think I knocked them over. This is Wolverine Volume 4 from Wolverine's surprisingly long-lived solo book. And I bought Wolverine #1, and I bought the following 6 or 7 issues because they were drawn by John Buscema, who's a Marvel artist, a legendary Marvel artist that I just love, even though I'm not particularly fond of the character of Wolverine. And I know that's heresy, but he's always struck me as a little boring and also a lot overdone. He's a normal man who has unbreakable bones and razor-sharp blades coming out of his knuckles. And you might think, okay, well, that sounds pretty formidable, but Marvel writers routinely have him going toe-to-toe with characters who can lift battleships out of the water. And that wouldn't happen. As I've tried to make clear in person to a whole bunch of people who are trapped in conversation and on this channel, if you want to picture Wolverine, bad though he is, fighting, for instance, Prince Namor the Submariner, Wolverine can lift 220 pounds. Prince Namor the Submariner can lift 85 tons. So if you want to picture what a fight between them would be like, picture a small toddler. Equip a small toddler with knives that they can hold in between their knuckles that can cut any known substance. And then you fight that small toddler. It's not going to matter how sharp those knives are. If you are 150 times stronger than the little toddler with the really sharp knives, you're going to win in a few seconds. And yet, when Wolverine goes up against some character, starting with his very first appearance, where he fights not only the Hulk but Wendigo, both of whom are Class 100 Marvel strength. They should have flattened him to a puddle. but it never fails. It never fails that Marvel does that. So I'm not enchanted with the character. The only reason that I bought those original issues was for the art. And when John Buscema migrated away from the book, I migrated away from the book as well. So I have not read any of the issues in this volume. But I was noticing when I was looking at it that the artwork there's Andy Kubert, Ian Churchill, Ron Garney. Ron Garney's fantastic. He just did a run of Savage Sword of Conan for Marvel. He's just incredible. And this will be Adam Kubert, Ron Garney artwork that I've never seen. So for $2 or $3 or whatever it was, I'm happy to do it. And the other essential volume was this thing. It was the first X-Men volume that reprints X-Men 1 through 24 of the original X-Men, of the original team. With it new, you notice the difference between these. This is just a repurposed cover from one of those Wolverine issues. Because by this point, by the time Wolverine had a fourth essential volume, Marvel had learned to cut costs even more on these essential volumes. So, and one of the ways you do that is you don't offset the cheapness of the volume by commissioning original artwork. And they weren't doing it by the time they did this, but this is a very early essential volume. And they commissioned Bruce Timm to do not only the front cover, but the back cover as well. That cuts into your overhead. but this is the first... You know, these are the original issues, the ones that made an impression on comic book fans from the introduction of the X-Men. And I'm not in love enough with these original issues of the X-Men to ever want them in an expensive, glossy color reproduction, but I'll gladly take this. I'll gladly take this. So those were finds as well, and that was my book buying for today. It was... Once again, egregious. I am slowly but surely building a stack of books that I need like another hole in the head. But we have the Essential X-Men Volume 1. This is the introduction of Marvel's X-Men. Then we have the Essential Wolverine Volume 4. So many, many plot lines have gone through Wolverine's volume before they got to this, and I don't know any of them. So this is going to be new comic book stuff for me. Then the Shahini Beowulf. I'm pretty sure this is the only copy that I have. Lord Byron at Harrow School, a slim volume of biography about Byron that I have not read. That's pretty amazing. Then Long Knife, a big, thick, and very conscientious historical novel. And 3 of these great old modern library volumes. This one is the Francis Hackett Henry VIII, then Henry James's Bostonians, and Edith Hamilton's The Greek Way. 3 books that I know really well, but I will probably take the opportunity to do a little rereading. I won't reread the Hackett, but I'll reread, for instance, the Thucydides and Herodotus chapters of The Greek Way, and I might reread the whole of the Bostonians, just to make me feel a little bit better about all this book buying. I might do that. But one way or another, that was the books for today. I'm sorry to break it to you. You will know this already if you're looking at your feed, that I'm not sure that these Vermont days are going to be 5 video days. I'm not sure that they are. I have 1 or 2 other things to do, and so it might be possible that you might have a bit of a slimming diet on your Steve videos until I am ensconced back in my little book room. So just to mentally prepare you for that, I'm going to move heaven and earth to do our read-alongs for this weekend. I think today is Friday, so Sunday we have 2 read-alongs that are ongoing. We have Stephen R. Donaldson and we have Frank Herbert. I'm pretty sure that I would have to travel about 500 snow-covered miles in any direction from where I am now to get the New York Sunday Times. So I'm pretty sure that's out of the question, but you never know. You never know. So just to forewarned as forearmed, you might be dealing with fewer Steve videos in our relentless march to number 3,000. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you.